Good morning. My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. In 1965, in mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter project at NASA on Langley Field. Dr. Colley was in charge of that project. They had problems with a piece of electronic equipment that was bottlenecking their production of photographs. I went to the facility, and when I walked into the facility, there were scientists from all over the world. I was stunned, actually, to see people at a NASA project from all over the world. It didn't make any sense to me initially. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. I couldn't repair it in the dark. I asked to have it removed. Airman second class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an airman second class. I was interested in how the whole process functioned, how the data got from the lunar orbiter to the laboratory. I asked the young man if he'd describe the process to me. He did. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. And at that point, I was very concerned because I knew we were working in compartmentalized security. He had breached security, and I was actually frightened at that moment. And I did not question him any further. And a few moments later, someone did come into the room. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress that what I'm saying is the truth.
Thank you, Carl. Good morning, everyone. My name is Donna Hare, and I worked at Philco Ford Aerospace from 1967 to 1981. During that time, I was a design illustrator, draftsman. I did the launch slides and landing slides, and also projection plotting boards, lunar maps for NASA. We were a contractor, but most of the time I worked on site, in Building 8. I had the opportunity to do extra work during downtime, which was between missions, and I walked into a photo lab, which was the NASA lab across the hallway. I had a secret clearance, which is not that high, but I was able to go into restricted areas, which this was. At the time, I was talking to one of the techs in there, and he drew my attention to a photograph, a NASA photograph. It had a dot on it, and I said, what is that? Well, he drew my attention to it, and I said, is that a dot on the emulsion? And he said, and he's smiling, and he has his hands crossed, and he said, round dots on the emulsion don't leave round shadows on the ground. And this was an aerial photograph of the Earth. I'm assuming the Earth because it had pine trees on it, and the shadows of the craft or whatever it was were in the same angle as the trees. And by its very nature, UFO, and I wanted to clarify that to a gentleman that was talking to me, means unidentified. So I did not know what this was, but I realized at this point that it's very secret, that it was kept secret, because I asked him, what are you going to do with this piece of information? And he said, we always airbrush these out before we sell them to the public. So they're pesky little creatures appearing on this photograph they wanted to get rid of. After that, I decided I would ask questions to other people that worked there. And I found that I had to ask them away from the site and not on site. A guard told me that he was asked to burn some photographs and not to look at them. And there was another guard guarding him, who was in green fatigues, watching him burn the photographs. And he said he was too tempted. He looked at one, and it was a picture of a UFO, and he was very descriptive. I can go into that later with anyone. He immediately was hit in the head, and he had a big gash in his forehead. He was knocked out, and he's terrified, so he would have to be protected. Another incident, I knew someone in quarantine with the Apollo astronauts. He told me that the Apollo astronauts saw craft on the moon when we landed. And that is what he told me. And he also was afraid, he said that the astronauts are told to keep this quiet. They're not allowed to talk about it. So I do want to let you know that I worked out there for a number of years, and I ran into this. So it's not something everyone knows that works out there for a long time. My boss didn't know about it. Some people that sat right next to me didn't know about it. It's very strange because I don't know how they can do it, but they can let some people know about it and then others not. I'm willing to testify before Congress that what I'm saying is true, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the press. My name is Larry Warren. 20 years ago, in 1980, I was a security specialist assigned to RAF Bentwaters, Woodbridge, NATO Air Force facilities in Suffolk, East Anglia. I had a secret security clearance. I guarded our backline nuclear weapons that were stored there at the time, without the knowledge of the people of Great Britain. I went through its portion of a 3-night UFO event where objects made incursions over our WSA, fired pencil-thin beams of light into them, and adversely affected the ordnance, possibly. These objects were on the ground on 2 different nights. Potentially, there was another life form seen. This is an unpopular truth. These events were of extreme defense significance to not only Her Majesty's government, but this government as well, and they are still shrouded in secrecy. They are very complex. They are very vast. This is more about a human rights issue than just a UFO issue. 20 years ago, this room would be empty. I see a turn in history. This is history in motion, but unfortunately, it's history with a security classification. I would be more than honored to swear under oath that I experienced what I did, I saw what I saw. These events produced not only, after numerous denials by this government, a memo by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, our deputy base commander, which reads like science fiction. It also produced, years later, an on-site audio tape he made as these objects performed their feats and did what they did and violated airspace. These events are of extreme defense significance. I hope my brothers in arms that went through these events will be given immunity at some point and be able to join us here. It is an honor to share the stage with all of these people. And I think for all our children, my son Dennis, God bless you, son, we can change the world. You're heroes for being here also, and I will testify in front of Congress if asked to. God bless. Thank you.
Hi, my name is George Filer III. The reason I'm here is because George Filer V is in the hangar and will be born on Friday. And I'm a retired intelligence officer and flyer with almost 5,000 hours, and I didn't believe in UFOs until London Control called us in the winter of 1962 and asked us, would we chase one? And we said, sure. So we let down from 30,000 feet to 1,000 feet where the UFO was hovering, and we went into a steep dive and actually exceeded the red line of the aircraft. So it's kind of dangerous chasing UFOs. In any case, I was able to get the UFO on the aircraft radar at about 40 miles, and we could see a light out in the distance, and as we closed, we kept on picking up this radar return. The point I'm mentioning that the radar return was very distinct and solid, indicating it was some kind of a metallic object. We got about a mile from the UFO, and it kind of lit up in the sky and went off into space, very similar to what the shuttle looks like when it takes off. Later on, I was working in intelligence in Vietnam. I briefed General Brown about UFOs when I was in 21st Air Force in McGuire Air Force Base. I briefed General Glau about a UFO over Tehran, Iran in 1976. That 2 F-4s from the Iranian Air Force had taken off and try to intercept the UFO. And when they turned on their fire control systems, they immediately went out. All the electrical systems went out. The planes had to return to base. This was particularly significant because it was also picked up on satellites. In 1978, on January 18th, I was going into the base. Every morning I did the briefing to the general staff, and I noticed that there are some lights off in the distance at the end of the runway there. And when I got into the command post, the senior master sergeant in charge said that there had been UFOs in the pattern all night. They're on radar. The tower had seen them. They got in aircraft reports and so on. And that one had landed or crashed at Fort Dix. Fort Dix and McGuire are right together. And this is kind of like the Roswell of the East. But in any case, an alien had come off the craft and had been shot by a military policeman, and apparently was wounded and was heading for McGuire. So for whatever reason, the aliens liked the Air Force better than the Army, perhaps because they're shooting at them. But in any case, our security police went out there and found him on the end of the runway dead. And they asked me to brief the general staff, General Tom Sadler, and at the 8 o'clock stand-up briefing. And I said, I don't think I want to do this. You know, the general doesn't have a good sense of humor, and I'm not sure I believe this. So I did some checking, called the 438th command post, and everybody had pretty much the same story. And at 8 o'clock that morning, just before I went on, was going to brief this, and I was very worried about it. They said, don't brief it, that it's too hot, so to speak. That's pretty much my story, and I'm prepared to tell the story in front of Congress, and it is the truth. Now, because of this, I've stayed interested in UFOs, and I'm the Eastern Director of the Mutual UFO Network. And between the National Reporting Center and Peter Davenport and the MUFON, we get 100 reports a week on average of people from all over the United States that see these things regularly. And if you start checking, they're out there and they're low, and people are seeing them all the time. And these are highly qualified people, all of whom essentially give us the reports by email. Thank you.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Clifford Stone. I was Sergeant First Class, United States Army. I had a secret clearance with nuclear assurity. I could get the clearance that I needed to do whatever it was that was necessary for me to do at the time on special operations when I was called in on those. What I'm referring to here is that I was involved in situations where we actually did recoveries of crashed saucers, for lack of a better term, debris thereof. There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes, also some were alive. While we were doing all this, we were telling the American public there was nothing to it. We were telling the world there was nothing to it. I'd like to go into detail on some of the cases, about the nuts and bolts cases right here, but I will be available if you have any questions concerning my involvement in this. You can talk to Dr. Greer to arrange for me to get to talk to you. But the whole situation is, we've set back, we've told the American people that there's no such thing as UFOs. I've been involved where we have recovered these objects. We know them to be of extraterrestrials. In 1969, I had an event that happened to me while I was stationed at Fort Lee, Virginia. We went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. That would be my first exposure to any time that we would be recovering an unidentified flying object. When we went there, we already had people that was already in the facility. We were a backup team, which was supposed to be NBC because there was supposed to be some nuclear materials that was on board this craft. Later on, most people involved would have been, were to be told that there was nothing on board it. It was nothing more than just a crash of one of our aircraft. I know better because I was one of the people that approached it with a Geiger counter to get surface readings. I was the first person to go ahead and see that there were bodies on it. That would be the first of approximately 12 events. UFO crashes are not events that take place every day. They're rare. I know we're not alone in the universe. I know that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's evidence that has been denied to the American people. I stand before you today in my almighty God, and I tell you this. If Congress calls me in and says, will you testify in detail what you know, I stand here today prepared and ready to do just that. Governments must never lie to the people for no reason. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mark McCandlish, and for the last 21 years I have worked as a conceptual artist for a variety of defense contractors. I've been involved in conceptual artwork of the production thereof for Rockwell on the X-30 program, and also on the high-step program. That's spelled HYSTP, means Hypersonic Testbed Program. During the course of my career, I've twice had a secret security clearance. In 1967, while my father was stationed at Westover Air Force Base, the headquarters for 8th Air Force Strategic Air Command, I witnessed and watched through a telescope a UFO which hovered over a nuclear weapons storage facility for approximately 10 minutes and then departed with an acceleration approaching a bullet leaving a rifle barrel. In 1988, in November, a college buddy of mine, an associate by the name of Brad Sorensen, informed me that he had personally witnessed 3 flying saucers at a very large hangar at Norton Air Force Base during the course of an air show that was held on Saturday, November 12, 1988. I subsequently called my congressman from that district. I called his office. This was Congressman George E. Brown, Jr., who at the time was the chairman of the Congressional Committee on Space Science and Advanced Technology. I naturally assumed that since this presentation that Brad talked about was for top military brass and certain congressional individuals, that his office must have coordinated this with the local Air Force Office of Public Affairs. A male staff member in Congressman Brown's office not only confirmed the exhibit, but the fact that there were 3 discs at that exhibit. These discs were hovering off the floor without any visible means of support. They were referred to as alien reproduction vehicles, also nicknamed the flux liner because they used high voltage electricity. Let's see, to keep things short, this is a diagram that I made based on a sketch that Brad Sorensen did for me in rough form shortly after he had his sighting, and subsequently cleaned that drawing up and made it much more accurate. And that's the drawing that Dr. Greer is holding there now. Later on, I obtained photographs that were taken in 1967 by a military pilot, Harvey Williams, flying a C-47 for the Air Force at 12,000 feet, approximately 25 miles southwest of Provo, Utah. This particular vehicle matches the so-called ARV in all proportions and respects in terms of the detail of the shape of the craft. And this was photographed, as I say, in June or July of June of 1967. I later spoke to a gentleman by the name of Kent Sellen that I met at an air show at Edwards Air Force Base in 1992, the first unveiling publicly of the B-2 bomber. He indicated to me that in 1973, when he was a crew chief working on experimental aircraft at Edwards Air Force Base, that he had unintentionally wandered into an area where there was a classified aircraft, namely the ARV. He described it in detail, and he added other details to the account concerning the configuration and the operation of the vehicle that Brad Sorensen was not aware of. Subsequently, Brad Sorensen met with the famous aeronautical designer Burt Rutan, gave him a copy of this blueprint which you've just been shown. Mr. Rutan felt that it was a joke and put it on his wall as kind of a joke. And a third party confirmed for me later that a Colonel Ray Walsh from Edwards Air Force Base was visiting Mr. Rattan, saw this blueprint on the wall and registered quite a degree of shock and anger, wanted to know where the hell he got this blueprint, because there was in fact such a craft at that time, approximately 1994, 95, in a hangar at Edwards Air Force Base, North Base Complex at that time. Subsequently, I've done a lot of research on this product, this vehicle. I've come across a number of declassified documents that show that the Air Force as early as 1960 was wind tunnel testing flying saucer shapes up to Mach 20. And I also have declassified NASA documents that show similar shapes. In fact, this is the document here that more or less details the wind tunnel testing up to Mach 20. This is the NASA document right here that was declassified, and it shows a variety of spherical and lenticular shapes that were flight tested up to, or I should say wind tunnel tested up to Mach 6. I subsequently obtained a copy of an inter-office memo from Hercules Aerospace that describes a particular type of science involving something called zero-point energy and scalar waves. According to Brad Sorensen, this is the basis of the technology for these anti-gravity propulsion systems. This particular document here describes 6 different meetings involving the Defense Intelligence Agency and cooperative efforts with the Russian scientific community in investigating this, what is called the fundamental enabling technology that was originally discovered apparently by Nikola Tesla in the early 1900s. Anyway, I could provide you much more detail at a later time, and I am prepared to testify in detail concerning these events and their truthfulness before Congress. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Sheehan. I'm an attorney and serving as general counsel to the Disclosure Project. I'm a 1967 graduate of Harvard College in American Government Studies and Constitutional Law, and a graduate of Harvard Law School. And I served as general counsel and one of the co-counsel for the New York Times in the Pentagon Papers case, and was involved in briefing and arguing the case in front of the United States Supreme Court, giving permission to the New York Times to publish the classified documents, the 47 volumes of the Pentagon Papers. Subsequent to that time, I served as special counsel to the office of F. Lee Bailey as one of the trial counsels when we represented James McCord in the Watergate burglary, and got Mr. McCord to write the letter to Judge Sirica to reveal the Watergate burglars' relationship to the plumbers unit in the White House at that time. Subsequent to my service in that case, I went back to Harvard to the Divinity School to study Judeo-Christian social ethics and public policy. Did my master's work and PhD work there, and became general counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., assigned to the National Social Ministries Office and their public policy office. It was there in 1977 that I was contacted by Ms. Marcia Smith, who was the director of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service. She asked to meet with me, and I met with her, and she informed me that President Carter, upon taking office in January of 1977, held a meeting with then the Director of Central Intelligence, who was George Bush Sr., and demanded that the Director of Central Intelligence turn over to the President the classified information about unidentified flying objects and the information that was in the possession of the United States intelligence community concerning the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. This information was refused to the President of the United States by the Director of Central Intelligence, George Bush Sr. The Director insisted that the President, in order to have access to this information, needed to have clearance to contact the Congressional Research Service, to contact the United States House of Representatives Science and Technology Division, to have them undertake a process to declassify this information, because the DCI suspected that the President was preparing to reveal this information to the American public. The Congressional Research Service Science and Technology Division, under the directorship of Marcia Smith, was contacted by the House Science and Technology Committee and instructed to undertake a major investigation of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence and the relationship of the UFO phenomenon to this. I was contacted by Ms. Smith and asked, in my capacity as General Counsel to the United States Jesuit Headquarters, National Social Ministry Office, to see if we could obtain access to the Vatican Library, to obtain the information that the Vatican had with regard to extraterrestrial intelligence and the phenomenon of the UFOs. I pursued that with the permission of Father William J. Davis, the director of the national office, and we were refused access as the United States Jesuit Order to the information in the possession of the Vatican Library. When I reported this to Ms. Smith, she then later subsequently asked me to participate in a project which I can go into some detail during the question and answer period or later to individuals, pursuant to which I was given access to, as a special consultant to the United States Library of Congress Congressional Research Service, to the classified portions of the Blue Book project of the Air Force. At that point, it was in 1977, approximately May of 1977, I went to the Madison building of the United States Library of Congress. There was no one in the building at that time. It was brand new. I was directed to a basement office where there were two guards at the door and a third sitting at the table who took my identification, verified that I'd been designated as a special consultant to the Congressional Research Service of the United States Library of Congress, and was admitted to the room. I thereupon found photographs, some dozen photographs, of what is unquestionably an unidentified flying object on the ground that had crashed and plowed a furrow in a field of snow, and it was embedded in an embankment. There were United States Air Force personnel surrounding this craft, taking photographs of the craft, and one of the photographs I could see that there were some symbols on the side of the craft. And so I proceeded through the photographs and found a close-up photograph of these symbols. I had been instructed that I was to take no notes and had to leave my briefcase and all my identification outside of this room, but I had brought with me a yellow pad. And so what I did is I opened up the yellow pad and refocused the overhead camera onto the same size as the cardboard backing of the yellow pad, and I physically traced the copies of the symbols on the side of this craft, closed the yellow pad back, put the microfiche back into the canister, reclosed the box that I had, and I said, it is time for me to leave. And I took this and proceeded to leave the office, at which point the security guards stopped me, and one of them said, "What is that you have there, Mr. Sheehan?" At which point I handed the yellow pad to him, and he flipped through all the yellow pages and never found the copy that I had. And so I took that with me and brought it to the United States Jesuit Headquarters, had a meeting with the staff, with Father William J. Davis, reported this to them, was authorized at that time by the United States Jesuit Headquarters to make a report to the National Council of Churches and to request that the entire 54 major religious denominations of our country undertake a major study of extraterrestrial intelligence, which they declined to do. I was subsequently asked to deliver a 3-hour closed-door seminar to the top 50 scientists of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which I did do in 1977. I'm more than happy to testify under oath to these details to the United States Congress, and would be happy to meet with any members of the press at that time. You may recall I also served as chief counsel to the Karen Silkwood case. in which we obtained the rulings in the Karen Silkwood case. I also served as chief counsel in the Iran-Contra case. It was the first one to testify before the United States Congress to the existence of the off-the-shelf enterprise of Richard Secord and Albert Hakim. I'll be more than happy to share the details of what I believe to be the relationship between this off-the-shelf enterprise and the secret government which is concealing this information from the American public. And I am happy and proud to serve as general counsel to the Disclosure Project. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Carol Rosen. In 1974, after being a sixth grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Wernher von Braun, in the U.S. the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, "Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space." And I said, you know, teachers don't stop until June. He said, "No, you have to understand, this is February. And we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies," he said, "against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system. The first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids." And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat. Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear on the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions, to waste these dollars on a space-based weapon system, and they're all lies. This is a system, he told me, that would never protect anyone. Even back then, he talked about suitcase bombs. He talked about chemical, viral, bacterial, biological warfare that these space-based weapons would never protect us against. And then he told me that, in fact, if you travel around the world, which I did after he died in 1977, I met with people in over 100 countries who were friends. They didn't want to build space-based weapons. I became a space and missile defense consultant. And I worked with people around the world. I became an advisor to the People's Republic of China. They don't want to build a space-based weapon system. And he told me back then that they didn't. He said, go to Russia. They're considered to be the enemy. I got on a plane by myself. When I got to Russia, I had a list of people that I had read out of the newspaper. Chernenko was in office then. He was the only one I didn't get a chance to meet. They introduced me to everyone when I got there. And when I got back, I said, oh my Lord, this man is telling the truth. There is no threat. And I've been waiting until this day for 27 years, and I'm expecting the spin to happen, because he also explained to me that as a military strategist, as a person who worked on the MX missile, which I did later, he said, you will find that there is going to be a spin to find some enemy against whom we have to build space-based weapons. And now we should expect the spin, because he said part of the formula for the intelligence community is if they might have a weapon, then we have to consider that they do have these weapons. So now they do have these weapons, so now we have to build these weapon systems. And that's the formula, except that it's all based on a lie. And we have witnesses here today that have shown you that these extraterrestrial beings, that these craft that have come here are now not UFOs, they're identified flying objects. And we know that they have beings in them. And we have witnesses here who have told you that they can shut down our missile silos. They can stop a rocket going into space that's a test. We have witnesses here who have worked in the classified departments, who have the courage to come forward here to support what Wernher von Braun told me back in 1974 to 77. And I will testify before the Congress that when I founded the Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space, which I shut down a few years ago because I didn't believe we had a chance with this huge, integrated around the world, complex weapon system, that we had any chance at all of transforming that war industry into a space industry that could provide benefits, like Dr. Greer has said, of global warming. We can end that situation of that problem. We can end the energy crisis. We can build now non-polluting technologies. Wernher von Braun used to tell me that we could have cars back then that drove around off the ground. He described this to me on beams so that we have no pollution on this planet. And we can solve the problems of the people that are urgent and potential, and the other animals and the other cultures on Earth and in space. And we can end the arms race without dislocating the industry jobs, without disrupting the economy, by transforming, von Braun told me, the war industry into a global cooperative space industry that will provide, he said, finally, more jobs and profits on this planet than during any hot or cold wartime, more products and services that can be applied directly to solving the problems of this planet. And we can have a whole planet now that lives in peace on Earth, with all the cultures on Earth, and with all the extraterrestrial cultures in space. And these are words that Wernher von Braun told me in 1974, and I will testify before the Congress under oath about everything I have said and more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank each of the witnesses and for your patience. We're running about 50 minutes late, and I do apologize for that. I want to emphasize that all of these witnesses each could speak for probably anywhere from 2 to 5 hours about what they have witnessed. We were trying to give you a snapshot. We have another 400 of these witnesses. I have carried this burden for 8 years. I'm now giving it to you, the American people and the people of the world, to take it forward. What I'd like to do now is open the audience for questions from the media. You may address them to me or to an individual witness as you deem appropriate.
And it relates to your question. There have been tens of thousands of sightings and experiences from all over the world. Only one needs to be true. Because if only one is true, then the entire case, the non-reality of these sightings, falls apart.
Such evidence out of the public domain. To announce today is all of the men and women listening to this need to know they are free to speak. We are declaring all national security oaths on this subject null and void. They have flowed from illegal operations that have no standing constitutionally. My people, my mother's family, who fought in the American Revolution, were prisoner of war with the British to help found this country, did not fight and die to form the United States so that this kind of chicanery can go on. So these men are free to speak, and there can be no legal repercussions against them. We have legal counsel who will also support this theory, and we're taking this to other constitutional scholars. It is time for that game to end. It is time for a new era in the human experience.
My name is Jean-Charles Duboc. I am a retired Air France captain. During Air France flight 3532 from Nice to London on 28 January 1994, I observed with my crew a UFO in broad daylight near Paris. And it looked like this, with a bank angle of 45 degrees. It seemed to be a huge flying disc. It stabilized and stopped moving. It was about 1,000 feet wide. The most incredible aspect is that it became transparent and disappeared in about 10 to 20 seconds. My co-pilot, Chief Steward, and I quickly realized that what we were seeing didn't resemble anything known to us, and we reported our sighting to RANS traffic control. There is a crew of 3 persons plus radar correlation at the same time, not the same place but the same time, and that means that we have had something real over Paris one day, a huge thing.
January 28, 1994. On Air France Flight 3532, Captain Jean-Charles Duboc is en route from Nice to London. His plane is near Paris, flying at 39,000 feet. The airspace here is typically crowded, but today it's going to have one more aircraft than usual.
We are meeting with retired Air France Captain Jean-Charles Duboc, whose sighting in 1994 of an object over Paris was one of the most incredible stories in ufology.
Captain Duboc is telling his story for the first and only time on American television.
It was a very beautiful weather. We were approaching Paris, and the steward who was in the cockpit said, "Oh, a weather balloon."
So it was the steward who first said there's a weather balloon there, and then the co-pilot who said there was something there, and that's what directed your attention.
I saw it, yes. It was on our left, and we look at this object during 1 or 2 minutes.
Though Captain Duboc's steward and co-pilot initially think they've spotted a rogue weather balloon, they quickly change their minds. The object is far too large.
And it was at roughly the same altitude you were saying?
Oh, it's below us. It was below us.
Below you?
Below us.
But how many feet below you?
4,000 feet. We are 39. It was about 35,000 feet. And so it was really surprising. The dimension was huge, absolutely huge, because the distance was about 25 miles, and at 25 miles you cannot see a plane.
When did you realize it wasn't a plane?
We all immediately identified this object as not a plane. It was different of a plane or a balloon or something. It was absolutely abnormal.
As the object moves towards them, they come to a shocking realization. What they're looking at appears to be a huge flying disc.
What's incredibly striking to me about Captain Duboc's sighting is he's a trained observer, being a pilot, and he was with 2 other people who witnessed this object. And it's apparently about 1,000 feet across, disc-shaped, in broad daylight. And that doesn't sound like a conventional aircraft to me.
It was red-brown with a red color, very curious. And it was some kind of haze.
Captain Duboc describes the red-brown disc as having a strange haze or fuzziness at its edges. And as he watches, he says it appears to be banking at a 45-degree angle. He estimates its size to be between 800 and 1,000 feet, or more than 6 times the size of his own jetliner. But what happens next is even more surprising.
So after 1 minute, it became transparent and disappeared.
So did it disappear quickly or gradually become transparent?
Oh, he became gradually transparent.
It's like it dematerialized.
When the object seems to disappear, Captain Duboc, his co-pilot, and his steward realize they are dealing with something extraordinary.
Two of the most striking details to me are the huge size of that object. It wasn't the size of a plane, it was much larger. And then when the object seemed to dematerialize before his very eyes.
What was the conversation in the cockpit of the plane about this?
Yes, it was, what was it saying? It's impossible to create such a huge ship and which able to disappear like that with such a fuzzy characteristic, with this color and this appearance. We cannot do that.
Captain Duboc radios in his sighting immediately to REM's air traffic control in northern France. They confirm his sighting with radar from CODA, the operational center of air defense. Their radar registers a nearly 1-minute hit, which crosses the path of Captain Duboc's Air France flight and then disappears. Despite the surprising detail, Captain Duboc remains silent for 3 years after his sighting. Neither his co-pilot nor his steward make a report. But in 1997, he finally comes forward with his story. 2 years later, it becomes one of the top cases in the Cometa Report, a 1999 document put forth by an independent defense think tank and sent to the French government. The report uses well-documented sightings, such as Captain Duboc's, to make the case that UFOs need to be treated seriously and as a matter of national security.
Were you impressed by the conclusions of the Cometa report that these were military issues that had to be addressed?
Yes, I was very impressed. I realized it was beyond everything I could imagine. It was really crazy. We cannot imagine the technology.
And that's the message of the Cometa report itself, isn't it?
Yes.
The Cometa report basically just says that we can no longer ignore the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Exactly.
The report concludes, quote, "These studies demonstrate the almost certain physical reality of completely unknown flying objects. They must be the subject of indispensable speculations and the development of prospective scenarios."
So what you take away from a meeting with Captain Duboc are his impressions of the size of the object. This was clearly something not a plane. And Captain Duboc went on to research what we have to do to understand what UFOs are and why they're here.